Hey everyone. So for this lesson, I just wanted to go over real quick what we're talking about in terms of what is a fish. We're starting to talk about fish at this point, so it's a good point to just kind of make it clear which animals fall into this category. So when we're looking at the primary characteristics of a fish, one of the things that we note is that they do have gills. So again, if you look usually just past the eye, usually you'll see either a single gill slit for a lot of your bony fish or multiple little gill slits for cartilaginous fish. And as we mostly know for fish, they are going to use those gills for helping them with obtaining oxygen while underwater. There are a few fish, and we'll get into that a little bit later, who do use lungs for respiration. They have a modified organ that functions like lungs, but they still have basically a structure that's present that looks like the gills, even though they may not always use them. Fish are also aquatic, so they live most of their lives in water. And I say most of in a lot of cases because there are a few that can crawl onto the land for very short periods of time. But again, most of them still have to retreat back to the water or to a wet environment pretty soon thereafter. So think about where you usually find fish, usually inside of water. Limbs without digits is another thing that we see with fish. And this one probably bears a little bit more explanation. So if we think about what are limbs with digits, limbs without digits, like we see in fish, usually all of their fins are kind of what we consider to be their limbs. Those are the extremities that help them move through their environment. But if we look at the actual skeletal structure, we have kind of a bone ending that attaches to the main skeleton. But as far as what's working off of that structure, here on a bony fish, we just see these little fin rays. They are just little filaments that help support like the kind of lighter parts of the fin to help give it structure, but they aren't true bones, and they aren't true what we refer to as digits. So when we say digits, I mean like my fingers. Fingers are digits. So when we look at the skeleton of a mammal, like a whale, even though whales are aquatic, and even though whales, when we look at their fin, it looks like just a single flipper, if we look underneath and we look at the bone structure, we would actually see digits. So we see structures that resemble fingers with all of those individual bones inside of them. So keep in mind that if it does have a flipper, but underneath we see these bony digits, it is not a fish. It's usually a mammal in that case. And then finally, the last thing that we want to keep in mind for all fish, they are all chordates and vertebrates, which we've already discussed. They have bony or cartilaginous skeletons. So being a chordate or a vertebrate, like we said before, they have a backbone that kind of runs through here, and they have a nerve cord that is running within that backbone. So again, in order to have a cartilaginous skeleton, we're talking about if it's made out of cartilage, so, like the same stuff your ear or your nose is made out of, a lot more flexible. There are some fish that have cartilaginous skeletons, and there are some that have bony skeletons, like our own. So, keep that in mind that even though the skeletal structures may vary, they still count as fish as long as they are chordates and vertebrates. There are a lot of animals that have fish as part of the common name that we refer to them as. So just because an animal has the word fish in its name doesn't necessarily mean that it is a fish. Be really careful about looking for all of these features, and you'll know whether or not you have a fish. So I hope this helps clear up what we're talking about exactly when we're talking about a fish.